forever. And I think Derek was 16 when I met him. No, he was very young, though. How young were you guys? 25. Okay, 25. Well, yeah. So I do travel full time. I've done 1,300 outreaches on this topic. So I love speaking at high schools and colleges. I do a lot of parachurch kind of ministries. I just got done I do Teen Missions Boot Camp about every other year. So I just got done back from them. 112 degrees, preaching in a tent, no air conditioning, and millions of mosquitoes landed on the landing strip right here because the bright lights were on my head. Yeah, not good. So I do have a museum in Maine, and let's dig into this. Genesis 1:26 says, God says, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Man in the image of God. And so a lot of people mess with Genesis 1, and it's kind of sad. But when you look at the 10 Commandments in Exodus, nobody wants to mess with the 10 Commandments. This is God speaking himself. He shouldn't mess with Genesis 1 either, but this is God speaking himself. And God says himself, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. God's pretty clear in the 10 Commandments when he created. Jesus talks about creation, Mark 10. The context is divorce. And the Pharisees are kind of trying to trap him. And he's kind of explaining things to them. And he says, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Not 4.8 billion years into the system. No, Jesus says, Adam and Eve at the beginning, fully human. Paul talks about sin and the origin of death. And he says in Romans 5, sin enters the world through one man, and death comes through sin. Sin comes, death comes. And in this way, death came to all men. And you can't really have death for 4.8 billion years and somehow arrive neatly, theologically, accurately at Adam. And so we are going to talk about the human thing this morning, creation versus evolution, human focus. And we would look at the cell, and we would say the cell is so complex, God had to have designed it. Now, when I was taking geology, et cetera, biology, et cetera, way back then, it was lightning hit the swamp, the evolutionary view, and life was formed. The first cell was formed. Well, all along the way, the whole time, everybody thought, you can't have 1,000,000 volts hit a pond and create a cell. So they ditched that and went to, they went to the clouds first. Life came from the clouds, and then they went to the deep ocean trenches. And now it has totally left the planet from an evolutionary point of view. So we'll dig into that. But we would say the cell is so complex that God had to have designed it. Well, obviously, Bill Nye, God, are you crazy? God designed the cell? No way, right? So listen closely as Bill lays out kind of the direction that evolution is heading, and it has extracted vast tax dollars from you to head this direction. So vast, it's almost beyond comprehension. So listen closely as Bill Nye lays out where he thinks life came from.
It's extraordinary, but not crazy to suggest that Mars was hit with an impact through what's generally called a home in orbit, an orbit where it goes falls toward the sun but ends up on the Earth. You are descendants of Martians.
Okay, and that's not crazy. Is it crazy that you and I are descendants of Adam and Eve?
We are descendants from a common ancestor. Right?
But is it crazy that God made the person and the woman and we're descendants of them?
For me, there's no evidence of that.
So is that crazy?
I
Humans made the whole thing up, the Bible. And so the Bible used to be kind of respected, but obviously not anymore the case in academia. But they're focused on Mars for the origin of life, and they're focused specifically on this 200-yard wide pit. They've designed a robot based on the design of a cockroach to go down into the pit, and they're looking for a fossil because they've already predetermined that Mars is older than the Earth. And so if they could find a fossil on Mars, which they won't because there's no flood there, but well, they're going to find a speck, and you know how this goes. And if they can find a fossil on Mars, they'll say, well, obviously Mars is older than Earth, and so life came from Mars. They're also looking for what is called a biosignature of life, which could be a little tiny trail from something, again, a little speck. And what they're trying to prove is, look, life can spontaneously generate, even though every law, scientific law ever written would say there's no way life spontaneously generates itself. And so this speck Mars gets hit, the impactoid gets blasted off with a speck of life on it. Aim's got to be really good because both are orbiting rapidly. We're 250 million miles from Mars. And so they got to have vast knowledge, this speck, of the solar system and a vast supercomputer to accurately forecast the landing spot of being the exact planet that's close enough to the sun, but further enough away from the sun, a cold, hot thing. And so this speck's got to have perfect aim. It's got to live in nothing. Try living in nothing, the vacuum of space. We can't live there for as long as we can hold our breath, right? Then we die. But this speck lives in nothing for 250 million miles, so it's got to have some kind of life support system. Avoids getting sucked into the sun, which is like everything gets sucked into the sun, and then enters our atmosphere. If you get the angle correct on the atmosphere entry, you could drop the temperature to 3,000 degrees. But if you don't get it right, you're at 1,000,000 degrees, so you're toast anyways, either way you do it. You're toast at 3,000 degrees. So this is a pretty miraculous speck that they're looking for. So they announced right before the election that the mission to Mars, which is still continuing to this day, that they'd like 100 people living there by 2020, which means this generation would be the one going, the kids. And they funneled $10 billion, that's with a B, not an M, $10 billion into the mission for Mars to look for this speck. That's the point. So, you know, if you're not bringing the speck home, you're going to see something if you spent $10 billion and you got to come up with a speck, right? The thing is, there's big problems with this whole thing. We have a magnetic field on the Earth that protects us from all the horrible cosmic and solar radiation flowing from the sun. Mars does not have that magnetic field. So they got a major problem. So our generation of kids sitting here, they get a little older, the first guy's going to go to Mars, right? He's got a problem. Cosmic radiation through the spacecraft, through his suit, through his brain. And so as soon as they announced the mission to Mars, all the scientists said, whoa, man, a mission to Mars could fry people's brains. And we got to figure out how to not become a sack of fluid. And so, yeah, that's pretty far out there. So they took mice, sad, but, you know, they gave them radiation equal to one way. Forget coming home, just getting there. And it basically destroyed the neurons, completely destroyed their spinal columns, left them with complete dementia. So whoever arrives there is not going to be in good shape. So he doesn't want to go there anymore, so who should be the first one to go? Well, I'm not going to take a vote on this, but Bill says, yeah, I want to explore Mars. I'd go to Mars tomorrow if I could come back. Well, you wouldn't be coming back. At least you wouldn't know who you were if you were coming back. So Bill says, well, if it's not Mars, then it's Europa. If it's no life on Mars, it's life on Europa. Now, most people don't know what Europa is, and that's normal. It's one of Jupiter's moons, and Jupiter has many moons. And that, if Mars is far away, Jupiter's super far away, 390 million miles from the Earth, dropping the temperature to be an estimated 260 degrees below zero. That is so far away, we do not even know what those lines are on Europa. We don't have a clue what they are because it's so far away. no plants to make oxygen, and they're trying to struggle with some kind of atmosphere for it, but really you can't come up with an atmosphere for it. And so the Hubble telescope is kind of focused on Europa, and they see this little image kind of at the bottom left-hand side of the screen that the yellow arrow is pointing at. And they said, what is that? What is it? Now this is like day one. They see it. Well, they say, wow, if it's, and it really literally looks like something in the background, but if it was actually coming off the planet, it would have to be going 100 miles into the, well, it doesn't have an atmosphere, but into space. And so that's day one. Day two, oh, it's no joke, day two. It's water. It's got to be water. It's water coming off of Europa, jetting into the air. It's water, it's water. Day three, I'm not kidding, day three. It's got an alien sea on Europa. And what are the little things in the alien sea? Alien life. But it's not going to be a DNA-based life. It might be an XYZ-based life. 3 days creates life on Europa in all your textbooks right now. So they see something. They create the alien sea. And this honestly is a lie. And if you think about a long time, you realize there's no water jetting up in the air when it's 260 degrees below zero. How far is the water jetting at 260 degrees below zero, right? Doop! I mean, you know, it's not happening. So you're getting off cheap on Europa. That's only a $2 billion project of our taxpayer money. And they're making the Europa Clipper to kind of skim Europa and try to collect some of this water. And so those are the two major NASA projects that they're kind of focused on. Now, evolutionists literally have failed miserably to explain how life started here, and we have literally the most perfect environment you could possibly imagine. And if you started counting parameters that you need all at the same time, there's at least 400. There's probably way more than that, but you need the correct distance from the sun. Closer is too hot, further is too cold. You need the right mass to maintain the atmosphere. You need the moon, the right size, in the right place, circling at the right time, in an orbit that's regular so that you can cleanse the oceans out. I mean, you need water that's freezing and not dropping, because if it froze and dropped, there'd be no life. You'd lose everything. So we need 400 at the same time parameters. We got them. Does it seem desperate to you to try to prove life started here when you're only working with like 5 elements in all the planets and that's it? And you got no parameters. I mean, they're trying to squeeze water out of Mars, but that's a whole nother question. Is there water on Mars? Well, of course, it's in the textbooks. It was discovered by NASA, water on Mars. Well, last December 2017, they kind of changed their opinion on that. And unfortunately, they never put that in the textbooks. But the dark features, evidence of flowing water, are now interpreted by new research as, and this is direct from NASA, sand and dust slipping downhill. Water's gone on Mars. And actually, if you had water on Mars, that's only one parameter for life. You need 400. So the things that lead to us, we would start, and obviously 4.8 billion years, there should be a nice long string of things that lead to us. We'd start with the space speck. I would say the space speck is, in the older generation, 75% of the views. The younger generation and the older generation would say alien seeding life on Earth is about 25%. But in the younger generations, it's probably 75% alien seeding life on Earth, 25% Mars. This whole alien thing is enormous. It is much bigger than you could possibly conceive of. And our largest creation conference in the country was in Portland, Oregon, and I spoke there a number of times, and it was 10,000. That's our largest. One of the smallest UFO conferences I was just out in Oregon, and they had 20,000, was one of their smallest. So the alien seeding life on Earth, the coasts, obviously different in the educational system than the heartland. And in New Jersey, they're teaching the 4 types of aliens. And what's so sad is you can literally trace each one of those types to a TV show that came out. Like literally. Reptilians from V, because they had to have a human in a reptile suit. Those are the reptilians. So there's actually a Norwegian type. I don't know if you knew that. So yeah, so there's the ancestral things out there. So the alien thing is huge. Now for me, my generation, 10% would believe in alien life on other planets, 10%. 18 to 24-year-olds today, 75% believe in real aliens on other planets. So when they're sitting in school and their teachers say, well, aliens may have seeded life on Earth, they say, well, of course. So I do an hour on Aliens, the Truth, and it's like the youth pastor demanded talk. And I'm flying to the West Coast. They're like, you got 4 sessions. The 3 you could choose. We don't care the other 3. But the one you're doing is aliens. You're doing aliens. So yeah, this is a huge thing and really alien seeding on life on Earth. After that little speck of wherever it came from, evolutionists say it turned into a sea blob. Now, the size of this guy's pretty, he looks big in that colored picture, and there's his technical name underneath the sea blob title. And it looks pretty big, but it's actually tiny, tiny, tiny. If you took an earring, this guy would be about 1/4 the size of an earring. I mean, it's minuscule. And the only thing they really know that they're trying to push is they know it removes waste out its mouth. No, I don't know. They always say, well, that's why we got this and that's why we got that. I guess this is why we got bad breath right here, removing waste out the mouth. So. Did we come from this bag-like big mouth sea creature? There is no evidence that you came from a sea blob. Now, when you're looking at the time frame, like imagine that this room is 4.8 billion years, and I started over here, and like year 0, and I went all the way to 4.8 billion. This stuff I'm going to show you is most of the room. The skeletons that I'm going to talk about in the second service mostly are like the paint on the wall at the end of time. They never focus on the 4.8 billion because it's really hard to believe you came from a sea blob. But there's no objective evidence that you came from this. The next step would be a fish-type creature, but they've kind of morphed it into a shark-type creature lately. And they're very serious. You get knee injuries because of your fish ancestors. You get hiccups because of your fish ancestors. You get the choking reflex because of your fish ancestors. And this goes really deep on many levels. Like if you're going to dental school and you take a class on the evolution of the tooth, they would say that when you are in a fish stage, the scale moved into the mouth and evolved into a tooth. Now, I've met many, many dentists on the road because I've been on the road for 13 years. And none of them believe that. Believer or unbeliever. They just do not believe that. So, but it is extremely serious. Now, when you get the book about Tiktaalik, which is the current one, used to be an older one taught to us, and they threw it out. Tiktaalik's supposed to be the first one that could kind of push out of the water and go on to land. But when you buy the book and you look at the reasoning behind this, it's kind of shocking because it's actually about sharks. So I just pulled out a couple diagrams so you could see. This one is the gill region of a developing human. Wait a second. A developing human, a gill region? We do not have a gill region. That's the parathyroids and the endocrine system developing. It's not a gill region. There's no capillaries near the surface of anything pulling. We don't have a gill region. The gill region of a developing human and developing shark look similar. Then you flip the page and you see the brain. Oh, the brain, like the shark brain, is a lot like the human brain. And I looked at that picture of the human brain and I said, man, I think there's got to be something missing in that picture. I just don't know what it is. So yeah, we don't have shark brains, come on, So, but then they found these footprints. And if you know anything about me, you know I used to believe in evolution. I got saved, I was confused, and now I believe in creation because I've examined the evidence thoroughly. And I don't believe in the millions of years. But when they found these footprints, it killed this fish. Because these footprints were supposed to be 8 million years older than the fish. Now, you can't be the first one out, making footprints if there's somebody already there and making quite large footprints. Then they found in Poland 18 million years older than the fish, so they kind of ditched the fish a little bit in most circles. But when I looked at the fossils specifically, I've excavated between 500 and 600 dinosaur footprints in stone in Nash dinosaur tracks in Granby, Mass. I'm the one that does the excavations. And so I'm very familiar with dinosaur footprints. And when I looked at this footprint, I was like, are you kidding me? And this is in mud, and it's got 7 toes. Now, what has 7 toes, right? One kid one time puts up his hand. My cat has 6 toes. Now, like, nothing has 7 toes. Then I looked at the diagram. This is actually USA Today. I'm like, did they do this with a crayon or what? And I looked at the bone structure of the 7 toes, and then I looked at the fossil. What a joke. That is what we call double strike. Animal put its foot down, lifted it up, turned slightly, put its foot back down in the mud. It doesn't have 7 or 8 toes, it's got 4 toes. But Ticklick's gone. They got rid of it themselves. This is Natural History Museum curator in Paris. It tracks lob a grenade into the fossil studies of the earliest land creatures. This is Jenny Clark, famous at Cambridge. Blows the whole story out of the water, so to speak. Fish is gone. Or Ticklick, semi-aquatic, whatever, pulling out of there is actually gone. After that, you turned into a rat. Now, kids, you did not come from a rat. I'm explaining this so I can tell what's wrong with this view, okay? This is what evolutionists say. I do not believe that. I believe you were made by God. But so this is supposed to be your 65 million year old mom. And, it shows the size over here. It's kind of a large rat. And there is no objective evidence that you came from a rat. Let me give you all the evidence you came from a rat. Then it kind of breaks off into eventually becoming a common ancestor. And the DNA thing was a big thing for me. And my mom was a Christian, I was not. And I came home, and my mom was a nurse. She was a very smart lady, but we hadn't really developed much creation literature at that time. And I said to my mother, did we come from apes? Like, I'm in school, and they're saying 99% similarity between chimps and humans. Now, 30 years went by, and all of a sudden, I realized when they told me that 99% similarity 30 years ago, well, now 40 years ago, they hadn't even sequenced the DNA. It would be 30 years before they'd sequenced the DNA, and they taught that for 30 years, hadn't even sequenced it yet. So when they sequenced it, it dropped to 94% similarity, which is millions of letter differences. But that is when they had a category called junk DNA. Now we know there is no such thing as junk DNA. And so it has now dropped and been resequenced, and it's dropped to 70% similarity, which is 900 million letter differences. The DNA thing is a joke. And unfortunately, most of the teachers don't keep up with what they're just teaching what they learned. And so, 900 million letter differences. The DNA thing has become a joke. Now, I want to show you kind of a category that I would consider to be fakes. And then during the worship time, I'm going to deal with the actual skeletons that you would call Neanderthals, the evolutionists call Neanderthals. Very much in demand, that material. And so Artie, your kids, your grandchildren, every single one of them will learn about Artie. And there's 35 Arties actually laying there in the picture. But they're a little bit hard to see because evolutionists say that in their lifetime, they were run over by hippos and pulverized into specks. So they're collecting the specks to make 35 Arties. Took them 15 years to build the first Artie. And for the very first time, forgot the gluing it together part. They just scanned it into a 3D imaging machine and adjusted the sizes and after 15 years built one on the computer. Now the point of it was to get it from going like this to somehow standing up. So the key bone in there is obviously the pelvis. So I was interested in examining the pelvis, and I was a little kind of shocked because as I examined the pelvis, the thing was silver. And I thought, man, this is the first silver pelvis I've ever seen in a fossil record. Why? Because they made it on the computer. Their goal was to get it to stand, and so they tell the kids, here, measure it, and you'll see it proves it stands. Well, yeah, because you made it on the computer to stand. Now, in the case of the pelvis, they actually had glued many of the pieces together, and that's what it looked like. And they don't show the kids that because you can't measure anything or prove anything from that whatsoever. Now, the head's extremely important. I had one guy ripping mad. I had people mad at me all the time. I'm in this high school auditorium, and this guy is swearing at me. He gets to this section, and he's steamed. And you know what? I just told the guy, look, don't believe me. Look it up. Look it up yourself. So here's the all-important head. What they did was they selected 125 pieces that they thought was skull material, which is extremely hard to do when it comes to specs. And they scanned it into the computer. They built the left-hand side of the face on the computer screen. They took a mirror imaging program and built the right-hand side of the image on the computer screen. And they put it in a carving machine with a giant hunk of plastic. And don't believe me, look it up in National Geographic yourself. And they carved your 4-million-year-old ancestor's face in a piece of plastic. So, yeah, this is, every kid in America will learn this. And they'll say that this is the best one. The second best one is one called Naledi. Every kid in America will learn about Naledi. And when you look at Naledi, it's a little confusing because the brain case is clearly only half the size of our brain case. So it's clearly into the chimp measurement side of things. It doesn't have any protruding nasal bones, which is kind of important because we have the ability to wear glasses because we have protruding nasal bones. They do not have protruding nasal bones. They can't wear glasses. So you got chimp brain case, chimp nasal bone situation. You got shoulders and curved fingers of something definitely designed to swing in a tree. So you got arms and hands of, or paws, whatever you want to call them, of a chimp-type creature. You got flared hips, clearly chimp. The rib cage, our rib cages are kind of a rectangle. Theirs are triangular. And this one's clearly triangular. So you look at this and you go, all the bones are lining up chimp, 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 chimp all the way through. But the issue here is the cave. That's the most important issue. And the fossil site is at the end of the cave system. There's multiple entrances to the cave, but there's no exits. Once you get down here, that's it. You are there. There is no evidence of human anything in that cave, no tools, nothing like that whatsoever. So why is this cave so important? Well, when you focus on where these guys are buried, at the end of the cave, and it's pitch dark in there because it's such a long cave. At the end of the cave, there's like a rise that chimps could climb up. And then there's like a little hole that they would go into if they were needed protection from like a predator coming in the cave or whatever. And then there is a 50-foot shaft straight down. Now, the size of the shaft is very important. It is 7.5 inches wide. It's about like this by about like that. How did they get a scientist in there? They never did get a scientist in there. They got the smallest spelunker, kids, that's people who explore caves, female spelunker they could find, and they jammed her down the hole, like literally, with a camera. So she goes down this hole, and they find 15 bodies of chimps. And Lee Berger, he's back in the tent. He's so excited because he's looking for a transitional form, and he's so excited he's like giddy. I mean, he's like, whoa, that we found it. This is it, man. So, and this is what they said. They are going in there to bury their dead. and we're the only ones who bury our dead. So they are in the process of becoming human. They're burying their dead. Well, how about another plan? They went down the 50-foot shaft from the ceiling and couldn't get back up. Yes. So National Geographic, of course, makes a series of pictures. So there they are in the 7.5-inch shaft. Whoa, is that like 10 feet? It's supposed to be 7.5 inches. And they're standing, even though their pelvises are far too primitive to stand, and everybody knows it. And so, yeah, this is something bogus from the first minute it comes out. So I love it when the evolutionists attack themselves, because then you end up at the truth somehow. This is Stony Brook School of Medicine. Intentional disposal of rotting corpses by fellow pinheads makes a nice headline, but seems like a stretch to me. The new species and dump the dead claims are clearly for the media. None of them is substantiated by the data presented in the publications. In fact, when Lee Berger submitted it to Nature said, no, this is ridiculous. Lee had another supposed transitional form called the Hobbit. He's still in your textbooks. He presented the Hobbit to the National Academy of the Sciences, and they said, you know what, Lee, this is a pygmy. In fact, did you take a close look at his mouth? It's got a filling that was made by a dentist in the 1950s. Now, I don't know about you, but I would have noticed fillings in its mouth in this all-important skeleton. But and so you got 4.8 billion years to kind of summarize. And this is literally the evidence. Seriously. It requires a whole lot of blind faith to accept that series, that you came from a rat. There's no, it's just not there. It's just not there. Now, we'll get to the skeletons in the ground, and when you see what they really are, it's shocking, and it's awesome. And I'm going to show you, you could date how old the person was when they died based on their tooth wear. I'm going to show you tooth wear that's 159 years old. And it's easy to see. And it's biblical dates, post-flood biblical dates of long life. So we'll get to that during the second service. But literally, that is what we're looking at for the proof. In the beginning, God created. That's what the Word of God says. And I'll tell you what, when you begin to look at the design features in us, and we only have a short amount of time, we can barely scratch the surface. But just a baby adding 15,000 cells per minute, that's astounding, because one living cell is more complex than New York City. One cell more complex than New York City, and it's adding 15,000 cells a minute. And everything that New York City has, that cell has. Energy production, energy consumption, transportation, waste removal, building things, taking things apart, moving things around. It's stunning. It blows you away. And a baby's adding 15,000 of them a minute. That's unbelievable. Your brain. Now listen, I'm going to deviate for a moment here. And even you younger people need to realize there's a large difference between the female human brain and the male human brain. I'm going to tell you the difference right now. The female human brain has two sides to their brain. They have a superhighway from one side to the other, okay? The male human brain, we also have two sides to our brain. And we have a dirt road from one side to the other. And that is why we like trucks so much. That's right. So that is the difference. But literally, if you added up all of the electrical connections from every appliance in the world, your brain actually has more electrical connections than all of the appliances in the world put together. It is stunning what God made you, how God made you. You are the ultimate part of God's creation. All the rest was just made for you. He is absolutely in love with you, and you are amazing in His sight. The DNA, The DNA, you know, I always have people ask me. I'm in Booth Bay in Maine, very wealthy community, lots of doctors. They're protesting me coming to this YMCA to speak for like 3 weeks, and so it's hostile. And I get there and I'm like, hey, and they're like glaring. So I have this lady who's got 2 doctorates, and one is in biochemistry. And she just wants to talk. So I said, you know, when I get to the design in the egg and DNA stuff, I'd like you to address the crowd with a doctorate in biochemistry. So kids, if you took the information in your body and you put all that information that's in your body into book form, in a book, the books required to record the information in your body would fill thousands of stadiums. But it's recorded chemically in our body on a size that we can't even conceive of, in a complexity we can't even conceive of. And now we're beginning to learn that DNA is much deeper than we thought in its complexity. And so how do you take all that information and fill thousands of stadiums and stuff it into our DNA? It's unbelievable. So I had the lady stand up and I said, could you explain to us how we could record 2 + 2 chemically? And she sat down. We can't record 2 + 2 chemically. And yet all the information that would fill thousands of stadiums is encoded chemically in our body. It's amazing. Accident? No way. I love this one. I've had a number of tumors, and my last one was particularly nasty. It was a nerve tumor in my leg. And they were moving me from the gurney to the surgical table. The bright lights are on, and I'm laying down, and all of a sudden the surgeon says, Paul used to believe in evolution, and now he believes in creation, because I witnessed everybody. And with that, as soon as he said that, Paul believes in creation, I sat up. And I said, yeah, man, when you cut into me, I'm going to bleed. And you know that if I didn't have blood clotting, I would die right away. And blood clotting is 14 chemical steps that happens in a cascade. So I'm just about to talk about God, and the anesthesiologist put me out. And I was sitting up. I literally went, bam. This shouldn't do that to you. But anyways, yeah, 14 chemical steps in a cascade, which means, here's step, you cut yourself. Kids, you fall down, you cut your knee, or your tooth falls out, step 1 kicks in. The reason we call it a cascade is 1 kicks in step 2, kicks in step 3. It is 14 chemical steps in a cascade of the most complex chemical understanding you could possibly imagine. Could you have 5 of those steps evolved and be waiting a period of time for the 6th? No way. You'd all die. You lose a tooth, die. Cut your knee, die. You have to have all 14 steps intact from day 1. You have been created by God. You are so complex, you could never, this stuff that you're a little speck of nothing in this vast universe. No. It is totally opposite. God is completely, absolutely, joyfully focused on you, your life, and your soul. But the problem is the sin deal. When we sin, this giant wall comes between us and God. Huge. And he is in love with us. He doesn't want this giant wall between us and him. And the most amazing act of love you can ever conceive of, even though we walked away from him and we turned our back and we insisted he didn't exist and all this kind of stuff, he loved us so much that Jesus comes and dies for our sin. Easter was a couple months ago, right? And some of you probably saw where he's getting beaten and whipped. That's not the worst part of the cross. The worst part of the cross is when God took my sin and your sin and put it on Jesus on the cross. But it's also the most beautiful part of the cross, because in that moment, he pays the penalty for our sin. He takes the punishment for our sin. And the Bible says when you realize you're a sinner, when you realize that giant wall of sin is there, and you turn from your sin, because of what God has done on the cross for you, with Jesus taking the punishment for your sin. When you turn from your sin, the Bible says, and you ask God to forgive your sin, he will forgive your sin to be remembered no more. And if you have never done that, that is the most important thing you will ever do in your entire life. And kids, if you're just beginning to realize that wall of sin is there, I want you to talk to your parents, talk to your Sunday school teacher, talk to whoever, and you need to pray and ask God to forgive your sins. And adults, I want to encourage you, talk with the pastor, his wife, the leadership, because it's the most important thing you will ever do to ask Jesus Christ to forgive your sins. So we got a couple minutes. I could do one of two things. We can either do questions for 15 minutes, or I can show you a supposed transitional form with a bullet hole through the head. What? Of course. No, I don't have it with me. You want to do questions or you want to do the bullet hole? They're all shy. Pastor, what do you want to do?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, let's do questions for a couple minutes. If things calm down, do the bullet hole. Bullet hole doesn't take very long.
I have a question. When you were talking about that woman biochemist,
Yeah?
and you said the 2 + 2 thing, I didn't get it. Could you? I didn't
Yeah, we cannot encode information chemically. Like on any level. It's just not the process we can use. We can't certainly even put a book worth of information and encode it chemically. So we don't know how to do that. But that's what DNA is. So that's all I meant. Yeah. Good question.
Replicate what goes on here by chemical processes by alchemy? That's what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the DNA in your body would stretch pretty much to the moon in one body if you unstretched it, uncoiled it. But it's all got information in it of extreme complexity. Now, we can move it around, we can mess with it, but we can't create it on our own. Yeah, we're not anywhere there. And to think that it came from an accident, I mean, every information study that's ever been done, information doesn't spontaneously arise from nothing. So good questions. Yes?
Well, I have more of a statement and then a question. So, in the realm of science, the physicists can't agree with biologists. The biologists, the paleontologists can't agree with the botanists, can't agree with the ecologists, can't agree. There is no synergy in what they're saying. Michael Behe wrote the book, Darwin's Black Box.
He's got a new one out, too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep, and so your statement of anticoagulation, he is not a Christian and wrote the very pointed proof that there is no point to evolution by human anticoagulation of the things that need to be in place for our body to do what you described.
Yeah.
So it has to be created.
Yeah.
So social sciences are not, they've departed from science.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head because they really do not agree with each other at all. In fact, the biologists think the paleontologists have the proof, and the paleontologists think the biologists have the proof, but like the paleontological community is very tiny when you get really up there. They do not agree with each other. I mean, even on simple stuff like, is T-Rex a predator or is he just takes advantage? So you are absolutely right. They never, and it changes so fast that you can barely keep up with it. And it's radical. Life started on the side of a crystal. No, life started in the clouds. No, life started on, it's so fast and so, but the big one we're going to deal with is life came from Mars. That's going to be around for 20 years. Yeah.
So the physicists are disagreeing with the chemists. The chemists can agree because they're still arguing about water. So here's the deal. From the beginning of Adam and the fall, and the blood crying out, and the first murder,
Yeah.
the blood is still crying out.
Yeah.
And Isaiah tells us, I'm tired of your religion. I don't listen to your prayer. Isaiah also tells we have all these environmentalists trying to say we need to save the earth. No, we've broken our covenant where Jeremiah says, because you've broken your covenant, God doesn't listen to your prayer. There's more evidence for God not listening to our prayer because of our sin than there is anything that they have that they can't even agree to themselves on
Yeah,
a
yeah.
scientific basis.
Yeah.
Because it's aggression and it's an affirmation of their selfishness, and there's no humility in it. But the humbleness of acknowledging you've done wrong, that's what God wants. And this is why we can't break through.
Yeah.